now.
Okay. Hi, Theo. Could you perhaps introduce yourself a little bit?
Okay, sure. So my name is Theo, and I also write under my original birth name, which is Gede Parma. I am a practicing professional initiated witch, working within the wildwood and reclaiming traditions. Um, I also have been a student of Anderson Ferry for 8 years and have had other initiations into other craft traditions as well. Uh, I am deeply passionate about reviving and recontextualizing the sorcerous and mystical and shamanistic oracular heritage of the world, and my special interest lies in Britain and Ireland and the Celtic countries, as they relate also to the rest of Europe and the history of that. And I also derive from a family tradition of Balinese Hinduism, um, whose foundation is animism and spirit work, divination, dream work, etc. So I come from a family where this is quite central and significant, and also in some ways normal. And this is what I do. I write about it, I teach about it, I travel the world, and it's my love.
So you're coming to Amsterdam soon to teach a workshop on
Yeah.
possession along
Mm-hmm.
with Raven. And I think the first question I'd have is how long you've been teaching in a group session and specifically your experience in teaching possession.
Mm. So I've been teaching possession publicly for the past 10 years. This is my 10th year of public teaching. Before that, I've been teaching in small groups of wildwood witches and other small private groups of witches and pagans. Possession is I guess something I'm known for in the communities that work with me and that I work within. It is central to my witchcraft and my understanding of the worlds and how I relate to them, how I also relate to the spirits. One thing I would say is for people to remember that in fact we are 90% bacteria. Like what we think of as self or personhood or individuality is in some ways very illusory, and that the practices of possession crack that wide open so that we are able to have enlivened, willful, voluntary, ecstatic, deeply enhanced relationship with ourselves and all our parts, whilst also being initiated into the knowledge and experience and understanding of how big and how small we are at the same time, and what is I and what is you and what is we. So possession is a profound way to interact and encounter these very real mysteries that can sound really abstract or intellectual or conceptual. But basically, in this work, we cultivate a strong and vibrant and deep sense of sovereignty. And when I use that term, I'm talking about the divine sacred truth that I am whole and complete unto myself, that I belong to the ground of my being, that I am natively, intrinsically a part of everything, and therefore I am endowed with and created by and creating in the same way that Grandmother Weaver and God herself is. So I have the same capacities as does God herself. I have the same agency as does the Weaver. I have the same power. And so to be able to get out of my way and to open myself as a vessel, to a strong and fortified vessel to hold space and time in this world for a spirit or the beloved dead or a deity, is a profound act of service for human community, and also a profound sensual, sexual marriage, or at least kind of an offering, a praise, a connection of devotion. It's a powerful act of devotion and it is an offering and a sacrifice that we can give our beloved spirits. It is definitely one of the most profound ways that I enact the pleasure and the ecstasy and the serious relating of my spirit work.
And when you teach a workshop, so the one in Amsterdam is a full weekend intensive, could you take me a bit through the days and the step-by-step of it all?
Yeah, so I often teach this work alone, as does Raven Edgewalker, my co-teacher. We have actually taught this, a version of this together before at a Reclaiming Witch camp in Australia. So teaching together is always a bit different than just me teaching or just Raven teaching or just you teaching. So when I team teach or co-teach with another teacher, I feel like what happens is we get different perspectives. We model the idea that there isn't just one person there preaching a gospel, although you can be a lone, solitary anchor or facilitator and, facilitate group process and ask for the group to, talk to each other and share their wisdom and insight as well. But during these intensives, basically what we do is we get together, we talk about who we are, where we've come from, our backgrounds, why we're interested in the work of today or the work of the weekend. And then we would generally ground and align our souls so that we are practicing potent presence, that we are alive to ourselves and aware of ourselves in all our parts in that moment. And then through that, we then usually craft a space between the worlds, and we step between the worlds into liminal consciousness so that we can perceive more, so that our senses are more awake to all the many layers and dimensions of actually what we occupy and that which occupies us, microcosm, macrocosm. And so we usually would then create a ritual space, a working container that's strong and secure, that holds us throughout the weekend, that we continuously invigorate and enliven and pour more life force and attention into as we go. It kind of gets stronger as we go. And then once that's set up, we usually go through several processes around our own bodies, or these, like this one, and exploring body and exploring how we are our bodies and how there's more to body than we usually talk about in Western culture, and the different parts of who we are, the different skins we have, and we explore those energetics, the auric skin, our energetic boundary. We explore what it is to know how to anchor into our core. We explore the difference and the differentiation and the distinction between invoking or conjuring a spirit to the edge of your auric boundary and being able to just sensuously perceive that there, and then by your sovereign will inviting that spirit, if they will, to step through your auric boundary and then to occupy, almost to straddle you as an edge or a hedge, and then to occupy a certain kind of threshold container, and then to be able to touch into the core of our sovereignty and perceiving the differences and the different levels of consciousness that open up in that kind of initial encounter with a spirit or a deity. And all of that is even setting up before we actually allow them or call them into ourselves to see through our eyes, hear through our ears, speak through our lips, speak through our mouths, and feel through our hands, and encounter the world through our human animal senses. So there's a lot of work that we do to navigate through and explore the terrain of our bodies, our souls, our skins, the different layers of who we are, breaking down what we've been taught about that, exploring the depth and the clarity and the power of that underneath, and then being able to come as aligned, grounded, centered beings to do this work of conjuring, calling, opening, getting out of the way, surrendering, being able to hold your own forefront consciousness and the consciousness of a deity in a double-headed way inside of you at the same time. And then also how to draw in a deity to someone else, and being the anchor and tender while they completely get out of the way, and cultivate a soul shape that's strong and potent and skillful enough to hold the full presence of a deity, and how that changes, how that affects community, how that affects our magic, how the direct encounter of a spirit that is using human voice and human smells, how that makes it more real to us, how that changes how we are beginning to perceive things that we only hear perhaps in our visions, in our trances, in our meditations, in our dreams, suddenly spoken or enacted in front of us by people who do not know us, and how that opens us to the realities of the spirits and the realities of the web that connects us.
And so when I hear all of this, I also at the same time have in the back of my mind what I've been taught about possession, that it's scary, cultish thing, that it involves total loss of control, or the control we imagine we have, and that it can be quite terrifying to witness, and even more terrifying to engage in the process oneself. So I'm wondering what kind of choices you offer to students and how far they go, what alternatives, and how in general you facilitate these workshops, creating a safe space for everyone present.
So in anything I do, I always have the caveat almost every time I introduce a new technique, exercise, or process inside the same workshop or same intensive. You are your own sovereign being. You do not have to participate. I imagine, however, I often say that and make room for that. And but most people I find will participate, because one of the profound things about witchcraft and magic is that it's not comfortable work. We don't learn or grow when we're comfortable. We grow when we're in our discomfort. And one of my mentors, Raven Stanfield, uses the language of the comfort zone, the zone of discomfort, and then the zone of overwhelm. And it's not great either we don't really learn and grow in the zone of overwhelm either, which is beyond the zone of discomfort. So in workshops, skilled facilitators will begin where we're comfortable, but then we'll invite and provoke and open spaces, holding them down so that people can explore in uncomfortable territory where we do learn and grow in powerful ways, but always with the caveat that people can go as deeply as they need to go. For workshops and intensives like this, people really need to have an established magical practice, and that can look however it needs to look. It doesn't have to be witchcraft. It could be ceremonial magic. It could be druidry. It could be a kind of shamanic practice. It could be Christian mysticism. It could be astrology. It could be yoga. But there needs to be some experience and relating to spirits. There needs to be the ability to ground and center, to be able to consciously, willfully, deliberately ground our energy and attention and come back from trance states effectively. And we need to be able to know how to sense life force and move energy and shape it, and how to go into trance states and come back. And these are the foundational skills of most magical disciplines. So I will say that. In terms of the facilitation of the space, and in terms of possession, if you're someone who is able to lovingly, powerfully, tantalizingly, provocatively call yourself a witch, then you're probably the kind of person who is able to come to a workshop run by two self-avowed witches like Raven and myself, and just dive deep. Possession is a word that it's a word like witch. It's a provocative word. Most people in the overculture in the West and in other parts of the planet, they have the exorcist in their mind. They have this idea of like malevolent entities possessing you and taking over. All I have to say to that is that literally again, we're 90% bacteria. So again, the idea of self, like we're constantly possessed. And the idea that eating eating a banana or eating bread is not affecting possession is ridiculous, because every time we take literally into our bodies something else that was once alive or still is living, vegetables, meat, dairy, yogurt, rice, we are taking into our bodies spirits coming into our bodies. Some spirits have been so successful in possessing humankind that we have arranged our entire societies around cultivating them. Coffee, cacao, grains, like that's only a recent part of our human history, and one could go into there are entire books written about that very idea. So to be able to learn to skillfully navigate the world of trance and possession, which is honestly happening all the time, is to become more profoundly graceful and effective and honestly practical. It's learning practical skills that affect our day-to-day life, because we can become possessed by or taken into all kinds of states of consciousness by anything in life, by media and advertising, by how much time we spend on Facebook, by depression, by anxiety, by our addictions to stimulants or addictions to pharmaceutical drugs. Like, these are all things that move us away from our center, and to some of these things are like essentially intrinsically a part of our chemical makeup, and some of these things are not. But either way, if we learn skills to be able to change consciousness at will, or deepen our skills and refine our skills around this kind of work, then we're probably going to have a kind of a more hefty toolbox, and tools that are designed in order to help us in these situations. And at the same time, possession and oracular prophecy and the ability to mediate for the gods and spirits in the human world is a profound gift to pagan and witchcraft and spirit working communities. Because if you have people who are trained and skilled in the possessory arts, you have people who are fulfilling quite ancient and important roles in human cultures.
Thank you so much for that. So one final question is, what do students or people, pagans, who come to your workshop, what do they usually take away from it? And how do you feel they re-enter the world after a weekend intensive with you?
Look, I guess I can only go off what people say at the end. I often have a debrief session at the end of workshops and intensives, and largely people are talking about how their ideas or preconceived notions of the cosmos or the world or self have altered and deepened in a way that is empowering, in a way that they feel more capable, and in a way that they feel more honed. One of my areas of deep passion is providing witches and spirit workers and occultists places and times that are anchored well and graced well, so that people can practice and refine and hone these powerful skills, so that they can take them back to their communities, whether they're consciously magical or otherwise, so that they can be of service. So that's one of my goals always with this kind of work, is to help people become of greater service when it comes to doing this kind of work. So I feel like some people leave with that in their pockets, with a sense of being more capable and more confident, and more trusting of their own capacity and their own intuition and their own connections to their own spirits and helpers and guides and guardians and deities and ancestors, and potentially also with a renewed a renewed passion and enthusiasm for this participation in the limitless, for this practicing potent presence, and for this turning up to the altar of our lives and to the shrines of ourselves, and just being willing to dive in and get messy and get fetchy and get deeply into the stuff that is life and death and rebirth.
And as a final note before I let you go, I'm actually curious for you to speak on two more items. And one is how this possibly conflicts or does not conflict with belief and religion. And finally, if you could talk about pricing and the 2 free spots, I think that would be very useful.
Okay, so you do not need to believe in anything in order to take workshops with me, and I would probably say with Raven. In fact, the idea of believing something before experiencing it directly and before perceiving it with your own senses is ridiculous. And I think, you know, one of my favorite proverbs from witchcraft comes from the Anderson fairy tradition. Victor Anderson, who was and is one of the grandmasters of that tradition, was known to often say, "Perceive first, believe later." So, you know, our beliefs and opinions and perspectives come from the patterns that we begin to observe through direct experience. And so in that way, our craft is a devotional science, which is often also what he said. And so you can be of any religious tradition or philosophical tradition. You can, you know, I can imagine if you were an affirmed atheist and wanted to come to a possession workshop where you maybe were calling on spirits to fill your body. I don't know how that would go, because I'm sure that would be hard for you because you might experience something, but and then you might have a revolution. But feel free. I guess, you know, come with an open mind and a discerning, questioning mind and heart as well. You know, questions and just discerning questions, clever questions, powerful, vulnerable questions are always welcome in the spaces that I hold. And, you know, be whoever you are. But if you are, but if you're coming to this intensive, I imagine that you're drawn to the occult. I imagine that you're drawn to the other world. I imagine that you're drawn to magic and spirits. And this is a welcoming place for you. And in terms of the pricing, Raven and I have tried to make this as accessible financially as possible. And so I believe, and I'm forgetting right now, I'm just checking. And is it 120 to 200 euros? Yes.
I think so, yeah.
I'm pretty sure the sliding scale is 120 to 200 euros for both days included. And what that means is that you pay where you can afford to pay. So if you can afford to pay 120 euros, that's what you pay, and that's fine. And if you can afford to pay 200, you pay there. And then there's also anywhere in between, 130, 140, 195, like whatever, wherever. And we still have 2 solidarity spaces, which means you don't have to pay anything financially at all, for people who are belong to marginalized or oppressed groups of people in society, so and who are struggling financially. So this would be single parents, this would be trans people, this would be immigrants, this would be people of color and indigenous people, this would be people with disabilities or mental illness. You know, so if you feel called to this work but cannot afford it financially, there are 2 spaces, and they are, you know, all you have to do is email us and we'll talk to you and work it out.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Pipaluk. Looking forward to seeing you on the other side of the world.